The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the general store just as the January wind cut through White River, Montana like a butcher's knife through meat. And when the door swung open, the woman who tumbled out looked more like a frozen corpse than a living bride. Vincent Xavier had been loading supplies onto his wagon when he heard the commotion. He turned just in time to see her collapse into the snow, her thin traveling coat offering about as much protection as a sheet of newspaper. Her lips were blue, her fingers white as bone where they clutched a worn carpetbag, and even from 10 feet away he could see she was shaking so hard her teeth rattled. The stagecoach driver, a grizzled man named Pete, climbed down and spat into the snow. "Mail-order bride for you, Xavier. Picked her up 3 days ago in Miles City. Kept telling her she needed warmer clothes, but she said this was all she had. Fool woman nearly froze twice over." Vincent was already moving, his long legs carrying him through the snow in quick strides. He knelt beside her, and up close he could see her face was waxy pale, her eyelids fluttering. Miss, can you hear me?" Her eyes opened, revealing irises the color of spring grass, foggy with confusion and pain. "I am Florence," she whispered in an accent he could not quite place, something European mixed with Eastern refinement. "Florence Zimmerman. I have come to marry Mr. Thomas Henderson." Vincent's jaw tightened. He knew Tom Henderson, and the man was 3 weeks dead from a ranch accident. The letter must not have reached her in time, but that was a problem for later. Right now, this woman needed help or she would die in the street. "We need to get you warm," he said, already shrugging out of his heavy coat and wrapping it around her shoulders. She was so small beneath it, the coat swallowing her whole. "Can you stand?" "I do not think so," she said, her words slurring slightly. "My feet, they have no feeling. My hands also. Frostbite." Vincent had seen it before, seen men lose fingers and toes to the brutal Montana winters. He did not hesitate, just scooped her up into his arms. She weighed hardly anything, and he wondered when she had last eaten a proper meal. Her carpetbag fell into the snow, and he nodded at Pete. "Bring that to Doc Brennan's place." "Sure thing," Pete said, but his expression was doubtful. "You going to tell her about Henderson?" "Later," Vincent said shortly, already walking. The doctor's office was only 2 buildings down, but the wind fought him every step, trying to steal what little warmth Florence had left. He could feel her shivering against his chest, could hear her breathing coming in shallow gasps. Doc Brennan looked up from his desk when Vincent kicked the door open, snow swirling in behind them. The old man took one look at Florence and pointed to the examination room. "Get her in there. Start with lukewarm water, not hot. We need to warm her up gradually, or we will do more harm than good." Vincent carried her into the small room and set her gently on the examination table. Doc Brennan was already pumping water into a basin, testing the temperature with his elbow like he was preparing a baby's bath. "Get her boots off. Carefully now. If the leather is frozen to her skin, we will need to soak them." Vincent knelt and worked at the laces of her worn boots. They were thin things, more suitable for city walking than frontier travel. The leather was stiff with cold, and when he finally got the first one off, he sucked in a breath. Her stocking was frozen to her foot, and her toes were an alarming shade of white. "I cannot feel them," Florence said from above him, her voice small and frightened. "I have not felt them since yesterday morning. The stagecoach, it was so cold, and there were holes in the floor where the wind came through." "We are going to take care of you," Vincent said, surprised by the gentleness in his own voice. He was not typically a gentle man. Ranch work had made him hard, practical. But something about this woman, so far from home and so vulnerable, brought out a protective instinct he had not known he possessed. Doc Brennan brought the basin over, and together they eased her feet into the lukewarm water. Florence gasped, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "It burns." "That is actually a good sign," Doc Brennan said. "It means the tissue is still alive. If you felt nothing, we would be in trouble. Now let us see those hands." Florence held them out, and Vincent felt his chest tighten. Her fingers were the same ghostly white as her toes, and the skin looked waxy, almost translucent. Some of her fingertips were darker, a grayish color that made his stomach turn. "We need to warm these up too," Doc Brennan said. He looked at Vincent. "I need you to hold her hands in yours. Your body heat will help, but we need to be gentle. No rubbing, no harsh heat, just steady warmth." Vincent pulled a chair close and took Florence's hands in his. They were ice cold, so cold they almost burned his palms. He closed his fingers around them carefully, trying to share his warmth without causing more damage. Florence looked down at their joined hands, then up at his face. This close, he could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the fear, but also something else. Determination, maybe, or stubbornness. "You are not Thomas Henderson," she said. "No, madam, I am Vincent Xavier. I have a ranch about 5 miles outside of town." He hesitated, then decided she deserved the truth. "Tom Henderson, he passed away 3 weeks ago. Accident with a bull. I am sorry you came all this way for nothing." The color that had started to return to her face drained away again. "He is dead." "Yes, madam." She was silent for a long moment, staring at their hands. He could feel a faint trembling in her fingers, though whether from cold or emotion he could not tell. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I sold everything I owned to come here. My mother's jewelry, my furniture, my piano. I paid for the travel from New York for the proper papers. I have $3 left to my name." Doc Brennan made a sympathetic sound and patted her shoulder. "We will figure something out. White River takes care of its own, even the newcomers. For now, let us focus on saving these fingers and toes." Vincent said nothing, just kept holding her hands, willing his warmth into them. He could feel the cold slowly leaching out, could feel her fingers beginning to respond, tiny movements that suggested the blood was flowing again. She winced, her jaw clenching against the pain. "I know it hurts," he said quietly, "but Doc is right. The pain means you are healing." "I do not feel very healed," she said, but there was a hint of wry humor in her voice that surprised him. "I feel like a fool. I crossed an ocean, then half a continent to marry a dead man. You could not have known." "No, but I should have been better prepared. Everyone told me to wait until spring, but I thought winter travel would be fine. I thought I knew what cold was. In New York, winter is cold. But this," she shook her head, "this is something else entirely." "Montana winter is not for the faint of heart," Vincent agreed. He adjusted his grip slightly, trying to cover more of her fingers. Her hands were so small in his, delicate and pale. He could see the calluses on her fingertips, the kind that came from hours at a piano. She had not been lying about that. They sat like that for nearly an hour, Vincent holding her hands while Doc Brennan monitored her feet in the water, changing it periodically as it warmed. The office was quiet except for the ticking of the clock on the wall and the wind howling outside. Vincent found himself studying her face, the delicate bone structure, the way her dark hair had escaped its pins and hung in damp curls around her face. She was beautiful, he realized, or she would be once she recovered from this ordeal. Finally, Doc Brennan pronounced her feet well enough to come out of the water. He dried them carefully and examined each toe with a practiced eye. "You are lucky," he said. "Very lucky. Another day of that cold and you would have lost these toes for sure. As it is, you will have some blistering and peeling and they will hurt like the devil for a few days. But they should heal completely." "And my hands?" Florence asked. Doc Brennan came over to look, gently taking them from Vincent. The cowboy felt strangely reluctant to let go, as if he had been entrusted with something precious. The doctor examined each finger carefully, paying special attention to the tips that had turned gray. Most of these will be fine. These two, he indicated her right index and middle fingers, might lose the very tips. We will know more in a few days, but you will keep your fingers, which is the important thing. Florence let out a shaky breath. Thank you, doctor, and thank you, Mr. Xavier. I am very grateful. Call me Vincent, and you do not need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same. Perhaps, she said, but her eyes suggested she doubted it. Still, I am grateful. Doc Brennan wrapped her hands and feet in clean bandages and gave her a stern look. You need rest, warmth, and food. Where are you planning to stay? The question hung in the air like smoke. Florence looked down at her bandaged hands. I do not know. I had assumed I would stay with Mr. Henderson. I have $3. Is there a boarding house? There is, Doc Brennan said slowly, but it is not cheap. $3 might get you 3 days if Mrs. Crawford is feeling charitable. Vincent stood up before he could think better of it. She can stay at my ranch. Both Florence and Doc Brennan looked at him in surprise. He felt his ears heat up but pushed on. I have a housekeeper, Mrs. Yates. She is a widow, very respectable. She lives in the house with me since her husband died. There is plenty of room, and Florence needs somewhere warm to recover. It makes sense. That is very generous, Florence said carefully, but I could not impose. You do not know me. I know you need help. Out here, we do not turn away people in need. Besides, he added with a slight smile, Mrs. Yates will be thrilled. She is always telling me the house needs a woman's touch, by which she means someone closer to her own age to talk to. Doc Brennan nodded approvingly. It is a good solution. Florence should not be alone for the next few days anyway. Those wounds need to be watched carefully for infection. He looked at Florence. Vincent is a good man, one of the best in White River. You will be safe with him and Mrs. Yates. Florence studied Vincent for a long moment, her green eyes searching his face for something. Whatever she found there must have satisfied her because she nodded slowly. Then I accept with gratitude. Though I insist on earning my keep somehow, I will not be a burden. We will figure something out, Vincent said. For now, let us get you to the ranch before this storm gets worse. He helped her into his coat again and wrapped her feet in extra blankets before carrying her to his wagon. Pete had left her carpet bag with Doc Brennan, and Vincent took it with them. The bag was pathetically light, and he wondered what kind of life she had left behind in New York. The ride to the ranch took longer than usual because of the snow. But Vincent drove carefully, trying to avoid the worst of the ruts that would have jolted Florence around in the back. He had made a nest of blankets for her in the wagon bed, and through the small window behind his seat he could see her huddled there, her face pale but determined. When they finally pulled up to the ranch house, Mrs. Yates came bustling out, her round face creased with concern. She was a sturdy woman in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back in a sensible bun and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. Vincent Xavier, what have you brought home now? First it was that injured coyote, then the orphaned calf, and now what? A frozen woman. But her words were belied by the gentleness with which she helped Florence down from the wagon. This is Florence Zimmerman, Vincent said. She came to marry Tom Henderson. Mrs. Yates's expression softened immediately. Oh, you poor dear, come inside quickly now. I have stew on the stove and the kitchen is lovely and warm. Between them, they got Florence into the house and settled in a chair by the kitchen stove. Mrs. Yates fussed over her, bringing hot stew and fresh bread, making sure she was wrapped in enough blankets. Vincent watched from the doorway, feeling oddly out of place in his own kitchen. You should eat too, Mrs. Yates said, catching his eye. And then you need to see to the horses. They have been standing in that cold too long. He nodded, grateful for something practical to do. He ate quickly, then headed back out into the storm. The barn was warm by comparison, heated by the bodies of the horses and cattle they kept close in winter. He unhitched the team and rubbed them down, giving them extra oats as a reward for the difficult journey. When he finally made it back to the house, Florence had been moved to the parlor. She was sitting in the large armchair by the fireplace, her bandaged feet propped up on an ottoman, a quilt wrapped around her shoulders. Her hair had dried, and he could see now that it was a rich chestnut brown, falling in waves past her shoulders. Mrs. Yates must have helped her take it down. "Feeling better?" he asked. She looked up and gave him a small smile. "Much better, thank you. Mrs. Yates has been very kind." "The stew was wonderful. You needed it. You are too thin." "I was traveling for a long time. Ship food is not very good and stagecoach stops even worse." She looked down at her hands resting in her lap. "I know this is an imposition. I promise I will not stay longer than necessary." "Mrs. Yates told me there might be work at the school. The teacher is looking for an assistant, someone to help with music lessons." "You are not an imposition," Vincent said firmly, "and there is no rush. You need to heal first." Mrs. Yates appeared with tea on a tray, setting it on the small table beside Florence. "I have made up the guest room for you, dear. It is the warmest bedroom in the house, right above the kitchen. Vincent, you should show her where things are." He nodded and led Florence upstairs, walking slowly so she could manage with her bandaged feet. The guest room was indeed warm, and Mrs. Yates had clearly been busy. Fresh linens on the bed, a pitcher of water on the dresser, and even a small vase of dried flowers on the windowsill. "This is lovely," Florence said softly, "more than I expected." "It is just a room," Vincent said, suddenly awkward. "But it is yours for as long as you need it. The washroom is down the hall. Mrs. Yates sleeps in the room next to the kitchen, and mine is at the end of the hall. If you need anything in the night, just call out." "Thank you, Vincent." She said his name carefully, as if testing how it felt in her mouth. "You have been very kind to a stranger." "You are not a stranger anymore," he said. "You are a guest, maybe even a friend in time." He left her to settle in and went to his own room, but sleep was long in coming. He kept thinking about Florence, about the fear in her eyes when she had realized her hands were frostbitten, about the quiet dignity with which she had accepted her situation. She had come so far, given up so much, only to find herself stranded in a place where she knew no one. But she was not stranded, he told himself. She was here in his house, and he would make sure she was taken care of. It was the right thing to do, the Christian thing, the human thing. The fact that she was beautiful had nothing to do with it. The fact that he had felt something shift in his chest when she smiled at him was irrelevant. She was a guest, nothing more. He almost believed it. The next morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. Vincent was up before sunrise, as always, tending to the animals and checking on the ranch. The snow had stopped, but it had left nearly 2 feet of fresh powder, making everything look clean and new. When he came in for breakfast, Florence was already in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a cup of tea. She was wearing a different dress, a dark blue wool that looked only slightly warmer than the traveling outfit from yesterday. Her hair was pinned up neatly, and someone had clearly helped her wrap fresh bandages on her hands. "Good morning," she said. "Mrs. Yates has been teaching me how to manage with these bandages. I can hold a cup now, at least." "That is good progress," he said, hanging up his coat and hat. "How are you feeling?" "Sore. The doctor was right about the pain, but alive, which is more than I could say yesterday." She took a sip of her tea. "Mrs. Yates tells me you own 2,000 acres and run cattle. That is a large operation for one man." "I have 2 ranch hands, Jack and Simon. They live in the bunkhouse with the other seasonal workers. Right now it is just the three of us year-round, but in spring we will hire more for calving season." He sat down across from her. "What about you? What did you do in New York?" "I gave piano lessons. I also played at a few hotels and restaurants, providing background music for dinner. It was not glamorous work, but it was honest." She stared into her tea. "My father died 2 years ago. He was a professor of music. My mother died when I was young. After my father passed, I found I could not afford to keep our apartment. I was barely making enough to eat, let alone pay rent. When I saw Mr. Henderson's advertisement in the newspaper, it seemed like an answer to prayer." "A mail-order bride," Vincent said carefully. "Yes. I know what people think of such arrangements, that they are desperate or scandalous. But Mr. Henderson's letter was kind. He told me about Montana, about his ranch, about how he wanted a partner in life. He did not make false promises. He was honest about the hardships. Or at least," she added with a bitter laugh, "he was honest about the hardships he knew about. He did not mention dying." "That is not the kind of thing a man can predict," Vincent said gently. "No, but it does leave me in an awkward position." She looked up at him. "I need to find work, Vincent. I cannot live on charity, no matter how kindly meant." Mrs. Yates mentioned the school. "Yes. I thought I might go into town this week and speak with the teacher. I can teach music, but I can also teach reading and arithmetic if needed. I had to help with my father's younger students sometimes." Mrs. Yates bustled in with plates of eggs and bacon, setting them down with a satisfied nod. "Good to see both of you up and ready for the day. Florence, after breakfast I want to check those bandages again. And Vincent, do not forget you promised to ride out to the Johnson place today. They need help mending that fence before their cattle start wandering." The days settled into a routine. Vincent worked the ranch, Florence recovered, and Mrs. Yates managed them both with cheerful efficiency. True to her word, Florence went into town as soon as she was able and met with Miss Patterson, the schoolteacher. The meeting went well, and Florence was hired to come twice a week to teach music to the children. It was not much money, but it was a start. Vincent insisted she save it rather than pay him for room and board, an argument that led to their first real disagreement. "I will not be a charity case," Florence said, her green eyes flashing. They were in the parlor, and she had been practicing the piano Vincent had inherited from his mother. He had never learned to play it properly, but Florence made it sing. "You are not a charity case. You are helping Mrs. Yates with the cooking and mending, and you play the piano beautifully. That alone is worth the room and board. Playing the piano is not work." "It is to me," he said. "Do you know how long it has been since this house had music in it? Since my mother died 12 years ago. You bring something to this place, Florence, something we did not know we were missing." She looked at him for a long moment, and he saw the moment she relented. "Very well. But when I have enough saved, I intend to find my own place. When you have enough saved, we can talk about it." The winter deepened, and with it, the bond between them grew. Vincent found himself looking forward to coming in from the cold, knowing Florence would be there, sitting by the fire with her mending or her books. They talked about everything: her life in New York, his childhood on the ranch, books they had read, places they dreamed of seeing. She told him about her mother, who had died of consumption when Florence was only 8. She told him about her father's students, a parade of hopeful musicians who had filled their small apartment with scales and sonatas. She told him about the crossing from Europe originally, when she had been a child, and how seasick she had been. He told her about his parents, both gone now. His father to a heart attack 5 years ago, his mother to influenza years before that. He told her about learning to rope and ride, about the summer he had spent working on a cattle drive to Kansas, about his dreams of building the ranch into something truly great. "You miss them," Florence said one evening. They were sitting in the parlor after supper, the fire crackling cheerfully. "Your parents." "Every day," Vincent admitted. "Especially at times like this. My mother loved winter evenings. She would sit right where you are sitting with her mending, and my father would read to us from whatever book he was enjoying." "What kind of books?" "All kinds. Adventure stories, histories, even poetry sometimes. He was a man of varied interests." Vincent smiled at the memory. He always said a rancher needed to be more than just good with cattle. He needed to understand the world. "He sounds like a wise man." "He was. I wish you could have met him." "He would have liked you." Florence ducked her head, but not before he saw the pleased flush on her cheeks. "That is kind of you to say." "It is true." The silence that fell between them was comfortable, warm. Vincent found himself watching the firelight play across her face, highlighting the delicate curve of her cheek, the soft fullness of her lips. When had she become so beautiful to him? Or had she always been, and he was only now allowing himself to notice? February arrived with more snow and bitter temperatures. Florence's hands and feet healed well, with only minor scarring on the tips of her right index and middle fingers. She said it did not affect her piano playing, though Vincent could tell she was self-conscious about it. He thought the small white scars made her hands more interesting, a testament to what she had survived. One evening, after a particularly long day of breaking ice on the water troughs, Vincent came in to find Florence in tears at the kitchen table. Mrs. Yates was patting her shoulder ineffectually, looking distressed. "What happened?" Vincent demanded, crossing to them in 2 strides. "Oh, it is nothing," Florence said, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I am being foolish. Tell me." She took a shaky breath. "I received a letter today. From New York. My landlord has sold all of my belongings that I left in storage. He said I was supposed to send payment to keep them safe, but I never received any such letter. My father's books, his music, my mother's dishes, all of it gone." Vincent felt a surge of anger at the unknown landlord, but he kept his voice calm. "I am sorry, Florence. I know those things meant a lot to you. They were all I had left of them," she whispered. "And now they are gone. I have nothing." "That is not true," he said firmly. He knelt beside her chair so he could look her in the eye. "You have yourself, your talent, your strength, your kindness. Those things cannot be sold or lost. And you have us. Mrs. Yates and I, we are your friends. That counts for something." She looked at him, her eyes still swimming with tears, and something shifted. He saw it happen, saw the moment her expression changed from grief to something else. Something softer, warmer. "Vincent," she said softly, and the way she said his name made his heart skip. He reached up and wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb, the gesture tender and intimate. "You are not alone, Florence, not anymore. I know," she whispered. "I know." Mrs. Yates cleared her throat pointedly and stood up. "Well, I think I will check on the bread in the oven. You two just sit here and have a nice talk." She bustled out, leaving them alone. Vincent was still kneeling beside Florence's chair, his hand now resting on the arm rest near hers. He could feel the warmth of her, could smell the lavender soap she used. "I should not have fallen apart like that," Florence said. "It was childish. It was human. You lost something important. You are allowed to grieve. You are always so understanding, so patient with me." Why, he considered the question, considered lying or deflecting. But she deserved honesty. They both did. "Because I care about you, Florence, more than I probably should, given that you have only been here a few months." Her breath caught. "Vincent, I know. You came here to marry another man. You are still recovering, still figuring out your life. I am not asking you for anything. I just wanted you to know." She turned her hand over, her palm up, an invitation. He took it carefully, mindful of her scarred fingertips. Her hand was warm now, no trace of the frostbite that had nearly claimed her fingers. "I care about you too," she said quietly. "I have been trying not to. It seemed wrong somehow to develop feelings for you when I had planned to marry Thomas. Even though I never met him, it felt like a betrayal. But I cannot help it. You have been so good to me, Vincent, so kind and patient and generous. How could I not care for you?" His heart was pounding so hard he was sure she could hear it. "Florence, I do not want to rush you, but I need you to know that my feelings are not casual. When I look at you, I see my future. I see a partner, a companion. I see home." She smiled, a beautiful, radiant smile that transformed her face. "I see the same thing when I look at you. It terrifies me how much I have come to care for you, how much I need you." "You do not need me," he said gently. "You are strong enough on your own, but maybe we need each other." "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I think we do." He stood up, drawing her with him, and then he did what he had been wanting to do for weeks. He kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, soft and sweet, a question more than a demand. She answered by leaning into him, her arms coming up around his neck, her fingers threading through his hair. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Vincent rested his forehead against hers. "I want to do this right," he said. "I want to court you properly. Take you to dances, bring you flowers, all of it." "I would like that," Florence said, "though I should warn you I am a terrible dancer." "Then we will be terrible together." They laughed, and the sound filled the kitchen with joy. From somewhere in the house, Vincent could hear Mrs. Yates humming, no doubt pleased with this development. True to his word, Vincent courted Florence properly. When the weather allowed, he took her on sleigh rides across the snowy ranch, showing her the land he loved. He took her to the Saturday night dances at the town hall, where she proved to be a better dancer than she had claimed. He brought her wildflowers when they finally started to bloom in March, fragile mountain blooms that she pressed between the pages of books. In return, she filled his house with music and laughter. She taught him the basics of piano playing, patient with his clumsy fingers. She read to him in the evenings, her voice bringing stories to life. She helped Mrs. Yates with the spring cleaning, and the two women became close friends, gossiping and laughing like sisters. The ranch hands, Jack and Simon, accepted her presence with easy Western friendliness. She learned their names, asked about their families, and treated them with respect. In return, they treated her like a lady, removing their hats when she was near and watching their language. But it was Vincent who held her heart, and she who held his. They spent hours talking, learning each other's rhythms and patterns. He learned that she liked her coffee with too much sugar, and that she hummed when she cooked. She learned that he woke before dawn every day, no matter the weather, and that he had a deep fondness for terrible jokes. In April, when the snow finally melted and the ranch turned green, Vincent took Florence to his favorite spot on the property. It was a small rise overlooking the valley, with a view of the mountains in the distance. The grass was thick with wildflowers, and a small creek burbled nearby. "This is where I come when I need to think," he said. "When my father died, I spent a whole day up here just watching the sky change." Florence turned in a slow circle, taking it all in. "It is beautiful, peaceful. I wanted to share it with you." He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Florence, I know we have only known each other a few months, and I know you came here under difficult circumstances, but these have been the happiest months of my life. You have changed everything for me." She looked up at him, her green eyes bright. "You have changed everything for me too. When I arrived here, I was so lost, so scared. I thought I had made a terrible mistake. But you saved me, Vincent, not just from the frostbite, but from despair. You gave me hope again." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond. It had been his grandmother's, one of the few pieces of jewelry his mother had owned. "Marry me, Florence, not because you need a place to stay or because you think you owe me, but because you love me and I love you and we are better together than we are apart." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, Vincent, I will marry you. I love you so much." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. Then he kissed her, deep and passionate, pouring all of his love and hope and dreams into that kiss. She kissed him back with equal fervor, her hands clutching his shirt, holding him close. When they finally pulled apart, both laughing and crying at the same time, Florence said, "I came to Montana to be a mail-order bride. I thought I knew what I was getting into. I thought it would be practical, safe. I never imagined I would find this." "Find what? True love?" "The kind I read about in novels but never believed in. The kind that makes your heart race and your soul sing. You gave me that, Vincent. You gave me everything." "You gave it to me too," he said. "The moment you fell out of that stagecoach, my life changed. I just did not know it yet." They were married in June, in the small church in White River. Mrs. Yates cried through the entire ceremony, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Jack and Simon stood up as groomsmen, looking uncomfortable in their Sunday suits. Half the town turned out, curious about the mail-order bride who had come to marry Tom Henderson but ended up with Vincent Xavier instead. Florence wore a dress she had sewn herself, simple white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Yates had lent her a veil, and she carried wildflowers from the ranch. She looked beautiful, radiant, and when Vincent saw her walking down the aisle toward him, he felt his throat tighten with emotion. The minister, Reverend Williams, kept the ceremony short and sweet. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness the union of Vincent Xavier and Florence Zimmerman in holy matrimony. In the short time Florence has been in our community, she has proven herself to be a woman of courage, grace, and faith. And Vincent has been a pillar of this community for years, a man of integrity and strength. Together, they will build a life based on love and mutual respect." The vows were traditional, promises to love and honor, to cherish in sickness and health, for richer or poorer. But when Vincent said the words, looking into Florence's eyes, he meant every syllable with his whole heart. And when she repeated them back to him, her voice clear and strong, he knew she felt the same. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Vincent, you may kiss your bride." He did, with enthusiasm, and the congregation laughed and applauded. As they walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, Florence leaned close and whispered, "I love you, husband. I love you too, wife." The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and food contributed by half the county. There was music and dancing, with Florence playing the piano for a while before Vincent pulled her away to dance. They whirled around the makeshift dance floor, laughing and breathless, while their friends and neighbors cheered them on. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Vincent and Florence slipped away from the party. They walked to the rise where he had proposed, watching the last light fade from the mountains. "Happy?" Vincent asked, his arm around her waist. "Deliriously," Florence said. "I never imagined I could be this happy. This morning I was Florence Zimmerman, alone in the world. Tonight I am Florence Xavier, with a husband and a home and a future." "You are everything I never knew I needed," Vincent said. "When I saw you fall out of that stagecoach, frozen half to death, I thought I was just helping someone in trouble. I did not know I was meeting the woman who would become my whole world. And when you took my hands in yours, trying to warm them, I thought you were just being kind. I did not know you were stealing my heart." She turned to face him, rising up on her toes to kiss him softly. "Thank you for saving me, Vincent, in every way a person can be saved. Thank you for letting me," he said, "for trusting me, for loving me." They stood there until full dark, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the stars come out one by one. The air was warm, carrying the scent of grass and wildflowers. From the house below, they could hear the faint sounds of the party continuing without them, but neither wanted to return just yet. This moment was theirs alone. Finally, as the night grew cooler, they made their way back down to the house. The guests had mostly departed, with only Mrs. Yates and a few close friends remaining to help clean up. The housekeeper took one look at the newlyweds and shooed them away. "Go on to bed, both of you. I will handle this. You have more important things to attend to." Florence blushed, but Vincent just laughed and swept her up into his arms, carrying her over the threshold of their home. She squealed and clutched at his shoulders, but she was laughing too. He carried her up the stairs to the bedroom they would now share, the one that had been his alone for so many years. Florence had already moved her few belongings in, and her presence had transformed the space. There were curtains on the windows now, and a quilt she had sewn spread across the bed. Her brush and mirror sat on the dresser, next to his pocket watch and shaving kit. He set her down gently and she looked up at him, suddenly shy. "I have never," she began, then stopped, blushing deeper. "I know," he said gently. "Neither have I, if I am being honest. We will figure it out together. There is no rush." She relaxed slightly, reaching up to touch his face. "I am glad it is you. I am glad I waited, even though I did not know I was waiting for you specifically. Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." He caught her hand and kissed her palm, then her wrist, then the inside of her elbow. She shivered, her eyes darkening with desire. "I love you, Florence Xavier." "I love you too," she whispered. "Now stop talking and kiss me." He did, and they spent their wedding night learning each other in the most intimate way, tentative at first but growing more confident as the night wore on. Outside, the Montana stars wheeled overhead, and inside, two people who had been alone found completeness in each other. The summer passed in a golden haze of happiness. Vincent and Florence fell into the rhythms of married life with surprising ease. She managed the house with Mrs. Yates, helped with the garden, and continued teaching music in town twice a week. He worked the ranch, managing the cattle and horses, fixing fences and barns, doing the endless work that ranching required. But their favorite time was the evenings when the work was done and they could be together. Sometimes they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Sometimes they read together in the parlor, her head on his shoulder. Sometimes she played the piano and he listened, marveling at her skill. And sometimes they simply talked, sharing their days, their dreams, their fears. In August, Florence realized she was pregnant. She told Vincent one evening after supper, her eyes bright with excitement and nervousness. "Are you sure?" he asked, his hand instinctively going to her still flat stomach. "As sure as I can be. I have been feeling sick in the mornings and certain smells make me queasy. Mrs. Yates noticed before I did, actually. She says all the signs are there." Vincent whooped with joy, picking her up and spinning her around. She laughed and clung to him, happy tears streaming down her face. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "A baby, Florence." "I know. Are you happy?" "Happy? I am over the moon. You have given me so much already, and now this. A child, our child." He set her down and kissed her tenderly. "You are amazing, do you know that?" "I had some help," she said with a smile. "It takes two, you know." "True. But you are the one who has to carry it and birth it. You are the one doing the hard work." "Well, you can help by not making me smell bacon for the next few months. It makes me want to die," he laughed. "Consider it done. No bacon. I will tell Mrs. Yates." The housekeeper was, of course, delighted by the news. She immediately began knitting tiny clothes and making plans for the nursery. Vincent cleaned out a room next to theirs and began painting it, letting Florence choose the colors. She picked a soft yellow, saying it would work whether the baby was a boy or a girl. The pregnancy progressed well, though Florence suffered from terrible morning sickness for the first few months. Vincent held her hair back when she was sick, brought her dry toast and weak tea, and worried constantly. But by October, the sickness had passed and Florence bloomed. Her skin glowed, her eyes sparkled, and Vincent thought she had never been more beautiful. In November, they took a trip to Miles City to buy supplies for the baby. They picked out a cradle, soft blankets, and tiny gowns. Florence also bought fabric to make more clothes, insisting that she wanted to sew as much as possible herself. "My mother made all my baby clothes," she said, running her hand over a bolt of soft white cotton. "I want to do the same for our child. I want to pour my love into every stitch." "You are going to be an amazing mother," Vincent said, kissing her temple. "I hope so." "I am terrified I will do something wrong." "You will not. And even if you do, the baby will not know the difference. We will figure it out together, just like we have figured out everything else." Winter came again, but this time Florence was prepared. She had warm clothes, a warm house, and people who loved her. The anniversary of her arrival in White River passed, and they marked it quietly, both marveling at how much had changed in a year. "Last January, I was freezing to death in the snow," Florence said, her hand on her swollen belly. "This January, I am warm and safe and loved, carrying our baby. It seems like a dream." "If it is a dream, I never want to wake up," Vincent said. Their son was born in March during a late spring snowstorm. The labor was long and difficult, and Vincent paced the hallway outside their bedroom, listening to Florence's cries with anguish. Doc Brennan was with her, along with Mrs. Yates and 2 other women from town who were experienced in birthing. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he heard a baby's cry. A moment later, Mrs. Yates opened the door, her face wreathed in smiles. "You have a son, Vincent, a big, healthy boy, and Florence is tired but doing well. Come meet your son." He rushed into the room and found Florence propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and when she pulled back the blanket, Vincent saw his son for the first time. The baby had dark hair like his, but Florence's delicate features. His eyes were closed, his little fists waving in the air. "He is perfect," Vincent breathed, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Florence, he is perfect. You are perfect. I cannot believe you did this." "It was rather unavoidable," she said with a tired laugh. "But yes, he is perfect, is he not? Our little miracle. What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months but had never quite settled on one. Now, looking at their son, Florence said, "I think he looks like a Thomas, after the man who brought me to Montana, even if indirectly. If Thomas Henderson had not placed that advertisement, I would never have come here. I would never have met you. In a way, we owe him our happiness." Vincent considered this, then nodded. "Thomas Xavier, I like it, and we can call him Tommy." "Hello, Tommy," Florence whispered to the baby. "Welcome to the world, little one. You are so loved already." Tommy Xavier proved to be a good baby, healthy and growing fast. Vincent was a doting father, marveling at every tiny milestone. Florence was a natural mother, patient and loving, singing to Tommy in a mixture of English and the German lullabies she remembered from her own childhood. Mrs. Yates spoiled the baby shamelessly, and even the ranch hands were charmed. Jack whittled a set of wooden animals for him, and Simon braided a tiny rope, saying he would need it when he was old enough to start learning cowboy skills. As Tommy grew, so did the ranch. Vincent hired more men, expanded the herd, and began breeding horses as well as cattle. Florence started teaching piano lessons at the ranch in addition to her work at the school, and the house was often filled with the sound of children practicing scales. Life was full and rich and happy. They had challenges, of course. There were years when the weather was bad and the cattle suffered. There were times when money was tight and they had to be careful. There were arguments and disagreements because no marriage is perfect, but through it all they had each other, and that made everything bearable. 2 years after Tommy was born, Florence gave birth to a daughter. They named her Rose, and she had her mother's green eyes and her father's stubborn chin. 3 years after that, another son arrived, Samuel, who was quieter and more thoughtful than his rambunctious older brother. The house that had once been so quiet was now filled with noise and laughter. Children running through the halls, the piano playing at all hours, Florence singing while she cooked, Vincent telling stories before bed. Mrs. Yates, older now but still spry, presided over the chaos with good-natured efficiency. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Vincent took Florence back to the rise where he had proposed. The children were with Mrs. Yates, giving them a rare evening alone. They sat on a blanket, watching the sunset, and Vincent marveled again at how much his life had changed. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "Staying here, I mean. You could have gone back to New York, found a different life, one with museums and concerts and culture." Florence looked at him like he was crazy. "Regret this? Regret you? Vincent, this is the life I was meant to have. I just did not know it until I found it, or until it found me in the form of a cowboy who warmed my frozen hands and somehow warmed my heart as well." "Your heart was not frozen," Vincent said, "just guarded. You had been hurt, had lost so much. You needed time to trust again. And you gave me that time. You never pushed, never demanded. You just loved me steadily and patiently until I could not help but love you back." She took his hand, the same hand that had held hers that first day, warming her frostbitten fingers. "You saved my life, Vincent, in every way that matters. You saved mine too," he said. "I did not even realize I was just going through the motions until you arrived. You brought color and light and music into my world. You made me remember how to live, not just exist." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, two people who had found each other against all odds. A mail-order bride who had come west for one man and found her true love with another. A cowboy who had offered warmth to a freezing stranger and gained a wife, a family, and a future beyond his wildest dreams. 10 years after Florence arrived in White River, on a January day much like the one when she had stumbled out of the stagecoach, she and Vincent stood on their front porch watching their children play in the snow. Tommy was 12 now, tall and lean like his father. Rose was 8, all energy and curiosity. Samuel was 5, already showing signs of his mother's musical talent. "I was thinking," Florence said, leaning into Vincent's warmth, "about that first day, about how I was so cold I could not feel my hands or feet, how I was so scared and lost." "You were brave," Vincent said, "coming all this way into the unknown." "I was desperate," she corrected with a smile, "but desperation brought me to you, so I cannot complain. You know what I remember most about that day?" "What?" "Your hands. How warm they were, how gentle. You held my frozen fingers like they were something precious, like I was something precious. I think I started falling in love with you right then, even though I did not know it yet." "I remember thinking your hands were so small," Vincent said, "so delicate. I was afraid I would hurt you just by touching you, but I could not just let you suffer." "And you have been warming my hands ever since," Florence said softly. "Not just my hands, actually. My whole life. You have kept me warm and safe and loved for 10 years now. For 10 years and for the rest of our lives." Vincent said, wrapping his arms around her from behind, his hands covering hers. They were not the same hands that had been so damaged by frostbite. The scars on her fingertips were barely visible now, and her hands were stronger, capable. Ranch life had changed her in so many ways, all of them good. Forever, Florence agreed, watching their children shriek with laughter as they built a snowman. I like the sound of that. 20 years after that fateful January day, Vincent and Florence Xavier celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary surrounded by family and friends. Their 3 children were grown now, with lives and loves of their own. Tommy was running the ranch with Vincent and had recently married a schoolteacher from town. Rose had moved to Helena and was studying to be a lawyer, one of the first women in Montana to do so. Samuel was still at home, teaching music at the school his mother had once taught at, and courting the new doctor's daughter. The party was held at the ranch, just like their wedding had been. People came from all over the county to celebrate, because Vincent and Florence Xavier were beloved in White River. They had given generously to the community over the years, helping neighbors in need, supporting the school and church, and treating everyone with respect and kindness. As the evening wore on and the guests began to leave, Florence found herself alone with Vincent on their favorite rise, watching the stars. They were both older now, their hair touched with gray, their faces lined with the marks of life well lived. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people they had been, frozen stranger and kind cowboy brought together by fate and frostbite. 25 years, Florence said wonderingly. How did it go so fast? I do not know, but I would not change a single day of it. Not even the hard days. The year we lost half the herd to disease, when Rose broke her arm falling from the barn loft, when we did not know if Samuel would survive the fever. Not even those days, Vincent said firmly, because we faced them together. That is what marriage is, Florence. It is not just the good days, though God knows we have had plenty of those. It is also the hard days, the scary days, the days when you do not know if you will make it through. But you do make it through because you have each other. When did you get so wise? Florence teased. I have been married to you for 25 years. I have learned a few things. She laughed and leaned her head on his shoulder, just as she had done thousands of times over the years. I love you, Vincent Xavier. I loved you when I met you. I loved you when I married you, and I love you now. I will love you until the day I die, and if there is anything after this life, I will love you there too. That is good, Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion, because I feel exactly the same way. You are my heart, Florence, my home, my everything. They sat there in the darkness, holding hands, the same hands that had first come together in a desperate attempt to stave off frostbite. Back then, they had been stranger and stranger, 2 lost souls brought together by circumstance. Now they were husband and wife, partners, best friends, lovers, parents, and grandparents. They had built a life together from nothing, had weathered every storm, and had come out stronger. And it had all started with a frozen woman tumbling from a stagecoach, and a kind cowboy who had warmed her hands and, without meaning to, had melted her guarded heart. Years continued to pass, gentle and full. Florence and Vincent grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They watched their children have children of their own, and the ranch house that had once been so quiet was regularly filled with the sounds of grandchildren playing and laughing. Florence never forgot where she had come from, or the desperate circumstances that had brought her west. Sometimes she would tell her grandchildren the story, how she had come to Montana as a mail-order bride for one man and ended up marrying another. How she had nearly lost her fingers and toes to frostbite, and how their grandfather had saved her by warming her hands with his. "And then what happened, Grandma?" the children would always ask, even though they had heard the story 100 times. "And then I fell in love," Florence would say, smiling at Vincent across the room, "with the kindest, bravest, most wonderful man I have ever known. And we lived happily ever after." It was a simple ending, perhaps too simple for such a complex life, but it was also true. They did live happily ever after, or as happily as any two people could in an imperfect world. They had their share of sorrows and struggles, but they had more than their share of joy and love. They had each other, and in the end, that was all that mattered. When Florence passed away at the age of 78, peacefully in her sleep with Vincent holding her hand, the entire town of White River came to her funeral. They mourned the loss of a woman who had come to them as a stranger and had become a beloved pillar of their community. She was remembered as a talented musician, a devoted mother and grandmother, a faithful friend, and a woman of grace and courage. But Vincent remembered her as something more. He remembered her as the woman who had changed his life, who had brought music and laughter and love into his quiet existence. He remembered her as his wife, his partner, his heart. He lived for 5 more years after she passed, long enough to see all of his grandchildren grown and settled. Long enough to know that the ranch would continue, that the legacy he and Florence had built together would endure. And when his time came, on a cold January morning much like the one when he had first seen Florence, he went peacefully, a smile on his face. His last thought was of her hands in his, cold and lifeless, coming back to life under his touch. His last feeling was of gratitude, that fate had brought them together on that frozen day so many years ago. Tommy found him that morning, sitting in his chair in the parlor, looking out the window at the snowy ranch. In his lap was a letter, yellowed with age. Tommy picked it up carefully and read it. It was the letter Florence had written to Thomas Henderson, accepting his proposal of marriage. She must have kept it all these years, a reminder of the path that had brought her to Montana. At the bottom, in his father's handwriting, was a note. "This letter brought her to me. I thank God for it every day." Tommy stood there for a long time, the letter in his hands, tears streaming down his face. Then he carefully folded it and placed it in his pocket. It belonged with the family papers, a testament to a love story that had started with Frostbite and a cowboy's kind hands, and had grown into something beautiful and enduring. Vincent and Florence Xavier were buried side by side in the White River Cemetery, under a cottonwood tree that Florence had always loved. Their headstones were simple, bearing only their names, dates, and a short inscription that Tommy had chosen. "Together in love, forever in peace." But their true monument was not made of stone. It was the ranch that still thrived, run now by their children and grandchildren. It was the music program at the school that bore Florence's name. It was the stories that were still told about them, stories of kindness and courage and love that transcended circumstance. It was the lesson they had taught everyone who knew them, that sometimes the greatest love stories start in the most unlikely ways. That sometimes being frozen half to death in the Montana winter is exactly what you need to find your way home. That sometimes a simple act of kindness, like warming a stranger's hands, can change 2 lives forever. And that love, true love, is worth every risk, every hardship, every moment of fear and uncertainty. Because in the end, love is what makes us human. Love is what makes life worth living. Love is what remains when everything else has faded away. The story of Florence and Vincent Xavier lived on in White River, Montana, told and retold with each generation. It became a part of the town's history, a reminder that good things could come from the hardest circumstances, and that love could bloom even in the frozen depths of winter. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, two souls who had found each other against all odds were together still, their hands clasped, their hearts full, their love eternal. The mail-order bride who had arrived with frostbite, and the cowboy who had warmed her hands and melted her guarded heart, forever united in the love story that had started with a single act of kindness on a frozen January day.